Yeah, is there going to be one at the end? I mean, because there's nothing really to question until...
Yeah, we'll do it.
Okay.
Susan Green, 624 East Walnut Street. Any of the energy plans that we're going to discuss tonight, I would like to know, are they affiliated with First Energy or Amplify?
What, I don't understand the question. You mean, what, the power that we bought or the power we're going to buy?
Any of the power sources that we're going to discuss tonight, are they, does it have anything to do with First Energy Corp or Amplify?
I would think, Garrett, what's the answer to that?
We procure all of our supply currently through American Municipal Power, and so I would say inherently it would involve in
Like 100% or?
AMP is an energy manager that enables us to buy market products through them. So it's really other counterparties that they're purchasing from on our behalf.
Okay.
Why don't we see the presentation and allow it to come to you?
Kind of lack.
I think the questions will be answered during the presentation.
Right, well, I thought that there was only going to be one public forum tonight, that's the way I
Well,
read.
there's a mistake on the agenda.
Okay.
So we're going to do two. That way it makes more sense. Thanks. Anyone else? Okay, very good. We'll go right into discussion of power supply master plan. Dan, you want to start us off?
Tim, do you want to have my agenda here? You want to talk about the Blue Creek first? Okay. We discussed that last week.
Yeah.
I don't know how extensive you want to get into that. You did see the report. I guess I would turn to Garrett and ask if he has any additional comments that he made. Garrett, can you just give a overview on that, please?
Okay. Blue Creek Wind Project is a wind project in northwestern Ohio. It's a project that American Municipal Power brought to the borough along with all their other members for potential consideration. In terms of reviewing the wind project, I've got to say that this project is one of the most economic wind projects that I've seen on the eastern half of the U.S., probably throughout my career. I've seen a lot of different wind pricing. This is one of the smallest pricings for wind supply. Having said that, when you look at the current market conditions, the forward conditions, the type of resource that you're getting, sporadic supply from wind, I think there are still market alternatives that are, marginally or slightly, I think, better priced. So when you think about wind, if you were interested in a project like this, you would have to at least put some weight behind the importance of pursuing renewable supply and adding those types of credits. But I will say this is one of the most economic wind projects I've seen. So if you put any weight behind pursuing renewable, I see it as a very interesting project.
Jim, I guess we could segue from that, unless there's some sentiment to discuss that any further. If the council is interested in pursuing this project, some decision would have to be made before the end of this month, before the beginning of June. So unless somebody has any interest in moving forward, we can segue right into the power supply master plan. We will be talking about not Blue Creek specifically, but we will be talking about diversified portfolio, which would include products like Blue Creek going forward. So, and again, if anybody has any comments on this they want to bring up after the presentation, we can go back to talking about Blue Creek. But for the moment, I would suggest we just put it back on the table.
Okay. Let's do that then. We move on to the power supply master plan.
Okay. Well, I know we have quite a bit of material here associated with this master plan. Hopefully, it's a reflection of the effort and a reflection of just the diligence that we spent in looking at these things. I don't intend to hit every single slide and spend time and time and time on all this information. I think a large portion of the meat of the decision issues are in the first half of the presentation, with additional information on or insights in the back half. just as a starter up front, one of the things that the borough, in having us take a look at the master supply plan, was really to take a step back and say, what is our approach to power supply? Are we looking at this in a diversified fashion? Historically, the borough entered into some long-term 5-year contracts at a certain total energy requirements covering pretty much all your needs through 2015, with a small amount left in 14 and 15 for consideration. But a big chunk taken over 5 years at a higher price time in the marketplace. And what we've talked about as we've considered doing a master plan was, well, we kind of want to get away from this idea of putting all our eggs in the market at one single point in time, living or dying with whether or not that price is advantageous at that moment. So, the thrust for putting this type of plan together was, well, we'd like to approach power supply in a more diversified fashion, much the same as you might manage a retirement 401k portfolio or something of that nature, that you're looking at different pieces, different terms, different products, and we're putting those in. And they all seem competitive portions, but they play a different role in your overall mix, and they're working towards cost stability long term. And that portfolio removes the highs of cost, and it also removes the potential lows. You're not chasing the absolute lowest price, but you're working towards a more cost-stable environment. So that's been the real thrust for the consideration of the master plan here. So what we're going to talk about is really some of the things that I heard from the council the last time I was here, some of the ideals that I heard, and how we've interpreted that into a plan and potential next steps or action items for procurement and power supply to stabilize costs long term, and also to achieve some short-term objectives of a lower cost.
Let me just also add in perspective, you're all well aware of our 5-year contract now. Garrett and I were talking earlier, and to our collective knowledge, I don't think there's any other municipality in Pennsylvania that has yet made the transition. There are a couple that have started, but everyone, all the municipal utilities were always used to that 5-year contract. We're now in that transition period, so layering and diversification would be the way we look at this going forward. But all the municipals were in that same boat. We probably will be the 3rd municipality in Pennsylvania to have a power supply master plan. Only Ephrata is ahead of us in starting to implement theirs. Chambersburg is discussing theirs tonight. We will be the 3rd. So I think I wouldn't say cutting edge, but I'd say we're really moving quickly to try to take advantage of cost savings and cost diversification as we move forward. So I think that's nothing but a good thing.
Okay, so I'll say very little about where we are today, and then get into our block procurement discussion or strategy. And I'm going to break this up into 3 different stages. These are 3 areas that I felt like we talked about last time where we wanted to focus, with the primary area being on 2016 and 17. Recognizing that we have purchases for the predominant portion of our needs through 15, and there's not anything that we can do to change those contracts. Okay, so the real focus being on 16 and 17, and I heard we would really like to see what we can do to ensure that cost in 16 and 17 is going to decrease, and then kind of roll into a post-2017 plan for procurement, but with a heavy focus on those first 2 years and what's going to happen in those years when we roll off this contract. Then at the end, we can talk about other diversity ideals, which we kind of preface with up front, and some key issues as we move forward. Just another look at the block power contracts that the borough has today. These are the contracts making up around the clock and some on-peak needs in these $80 range prices from Morgan Stanley. You'll recall that we took a step recently involved 7x24 block of power from Exelon that runs around the clock throughout the year for the term 2016 to 22, which was a 7-year block, and that price was delivered to our delivery location at PPL's Limit at $71.50. So that was the first step in seeing some downward cost average. Not only did we get a longer piece that provides some cost stability, which we talked about at that time, but it's also a downward price signal, roughly $10 or more here from what we've seen today. So that was the first step. And we talked about the last meeting, what can the master plan do to continue to improve on that position? Here's what our portfolio looks like today. Again, you can see we've got most of our needs locked up through 2015. The caveat there being that in 14 and 15, we do have roughly 20% of our energy requirements that remain. And we would be looking for opportunities here to take advantage of a lower market price and lock in some of those components. But 80% of our needs beginning in 2016 are open. So we have the Exelon block at 15, and we have historical Napa power, which is made up 5% of the energy. So that's where our real opportunity is in 16. How are we going to change things beginning that year? One of the things, I don't know what to say other than to lament about the cost of PJM charges, is that these charges, especially the red component, which is RPM capacity, these charges didn't arrive to the borough until June of 2006. And we, Perkasie, had no control over the inception of these charges. FERC instituted some desire for reliability in this market, and PJM had to uphold that reliability. So the way they were going to do that was institute this RPM market. And unfortunately, capacity charges, when that market went into place, shot from a very small number to the numbers you see here on the screen, which is some fluctuating here between $10 and $15 a megawatt per year. That's between 1 and 1.5 cents a kilowatt hour. It's an amazing amount of cost that has started in that June of 2006. Prior to that, really, we had these yellow, green, and light blue components, and that was kind of the cost that you received. But now we see a cost on average of close to $20 a megawatt hour. So recognize that even when the borough was back doing the blend and extend opportunity, and they were saying, well, we're going to get our energy costs lower, that did in fact happen. But these PJM charges came in and blew up to such a level, and really the borough had no way to manage that cost. So this is unfortunately a fact of life in this current market. These charges are here to stay. And it's just part of an uplift in this market that we have to recognize. Having said that, we move forward, and we see some opportunities here going forward in 2016 to stabilize costs and also potentially show some downsides. So I bring this slide up just as sort of our reality check for these charges that exist that aren't going anywhere, and we have to manage through these.
Let me ask a question here. And that $90,000 that PPL surprised us with, that extra charge,
Yes, that's a transmission.
that was a transmission charge on top of PJM charge, is that correct?
Yeah, the PJM, well, this is all PJM. I assume that's part of the agreement. This is the charge from PPL and transmitting to us.
Yes. Yes.
So it's part of the next, it's the network transmission charges in the green area. And yes, that was a $92,000 increase in 1 year, totally authorized by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which we absorbed over the last couple of years. But yes, that's an added cost. Jim, if I could also add, if you go back to the budget that we were putting together for this year, we talked a little bit about taking $300,000 out and putting it aside. One of the reasons we kept that in there and we did not try to do a cutback is because we know that those RPM charges, or PJM charges, and the RPM charges included, from 2012 to 2013 are going to take a big jump. So we're going to have to absorb a big increase, close to $5.50 a megawatt next year. We're going to be absorbing that, try to hold the line on our budget with that increase. And it doesn't come down for a couple more years.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just important to recognize that to look at here. Here are our estimated power costs, historically speaking, and then also coming into projected 2012, 13, 14, 15, and then the components that we're talking about in 16 and 17. And if you just stop and take a look here at what we see in the market out in 2016, when we have 80% of our needs on the market at that time, we see an opportunity for, I would say, significant cost decrease as a result of energy prices being low. This is in the forward market. We need to understand that when we talk about looking forward, it's not at current cost today just staying flat. It's a forward view of the market that's rising. So even in a rising market environment, we still see these type of costs in 16 and 17. That should be encouraging to you. That we have the potential to consider purchases today in 16 and 17 that would reflect costs closer to these averages than where we are at the moment. So, that's obviously the light at the end of the tunnel here in terms of the way we're approaching this. And our part of our master plan will address how many purchases do we go after today in 16 and 17 to begin to take advantage of some of this cost decrease in the market. And feel free to stop me if you have any questions, because it's probably easier to catch an idea as we go through this. So
What's the PJM cost? Are they universal throughout the whole industry? That one provider where you're looking at?
well, it's the PJM is in the Northeast, okay? So in this marketplace, they are universal to all load entities.
Be from AMP or any other provider?
Yeah, I mean, don't think about it as being associated with a particular supplier. It's really charges that we're responsible for, that PJM is bringing to us in order to fund capital for generators to build additional capacity to meet the reliability standards in the market. So these are charges that are being applied to every load serving entity in PJM. These charges are not respected to any supplier or a bilateral.
Well, then, it's not what you actually valuing these charges.
PJM, these are PJM charges to all the load serving entities. And the way the exchange of money occurs is load serving entities pay to meet their capacity obligations, and PJM takes that money and in turn pays that to generators who are providing the capacity. And so this market, this capacity market in RPM was put in place in order to ensure that these generators get on the ball in advance and get capacity up and running. But unfortunately, it's having an impact on load serving entities that's very severe.
I like to think of the PJM, correct me if I'm wrong, as the air traffic controller.
Yeah, coordinated.
And you're right, coordinator, and we have no control over that. They're going to charge us what it takes to manage that grid to get the power here. It's not transmission, it's management. Then we have a transmission charge, which is on top of that. And they're all out of our control.
PERC has supported this PJM mechanism for recovering capacity costs, although, I think everyone, a lot of load serving entities want to see revision to it, including us. But PERC is still supporting that, so at this time, it's part of our future.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
These generation plants, who regulates them?
I'm sorry?
Who regulates the actual generation plants?
Well, this market is, when we're referring to this capacity market, right? Okay, so in terms of the regulation, it's just these incentives are given to any generator who wants to bring their capacity online. It's not it's a regulatory sense here. It's just PJM has a program. Any generator that wants to plug in the grid can have these incentives if they meet the standards for providing this generation.
Any other questions? Okay.
So let's talk about strategy, block procurement strategy. This is sort of our view of what we think we heard from you in terms of what are priorities for locking in future energy needs at current prices and also future plans for procurement. And I've separated these into 3 stages. 3 stages that I felt like are areas we need to address. And the first is shown in 2014 and 15. If you recall, we had some 23% of our energy requirements still remaining in 14 and 15. We think that in this current market, there's some opportunity to lock in some portion of that and shore up those costs in 14 and 15 so that we wouldn't see any further rise in costs, and we do see a lower market in those years. The clear opportunity is in 16 and 17. The last time I was here and we talked about this component, we talked about a real desire that the council has to see costs decrease in those first 2 years, at least, when you roll off of the pre-existing contracts from Morgan Stanley. And what can we do to lock in greater assurance of cost decrease in those 2 years? So in the master plan here, we built a strategy around that. We said, okay, if that's a priority, we look out the forward market and costs are indeed lower. We think that once you consider locking in a strong portion of your energy requirements in those 2 years, not all of it. I think I heard pretty resounding that no one wants to lock in all of the energy requirements for these future years because to some degree that's how we got here to this position. But locking in a substantial portion of those needs at lower prices to ensure with great likelihood that the cost will decrease in 2016. So we've recommended a level of 70% of your energy requirements being locked in 2016 and 17 in current market conditions. That represents an incremental 50% from where we are today. We already have 20%, 5% in NIPA, 15% in the Exelon long-term block at 7150. So in terms of the 7150 price was a reduction from the 80s. So we're down to the 70s for that 15%, and now we're talking about another 50% where we would continue to cost average down. I recall a conversation last time, and Jim and I were talking a little bit about this cost averaging mechanism, and Matt was also commenting on this. But that if we had an opportunity to move down from 7150 to numbers lower than that, and as we build in our energy requirements 16 and beyond, that we would like to try to do that. To move towards lower costs while also stabilizing in the future. So that's what we're talking about in that stage. 16 and 17 is ensuring, providing greater assurance that costs will decrease in those years, while continuing with stage 3, which is to keep an eye on long-term cost stability and to take advantage of opportunities beyond 2017 to keep costs stable. So we really have 3 distinct sections here that we're going to deal with. And what would the strategy be in each of those years? Any questions on the 3 areas? I just want to point out before we move forward, there's not a lot that we can do in terms of 2014 and 15 to really change things because of the amount of energy requirements we have locked in. I'm actually going to go ahead and move forward here to slide 11. And don't be overwhelmed by this chart, but the blue portion on the bottom of each of these months in 2014 here and 15 is the part that we already have locked in. And so what we're talking about doing in 2014 and 15 is considering these incremental components that would make up that additional 23% of needs in those years. And we're talking about these because they fluctuate monthly, and you can see that. These blocks are, different sizes in every month, and what we're talking about doing is trying to go out in the current marketplace and take advantage of lower costs to lock in these incremental smaller pieces by month. So there's some shaping involved in this throughout the year according to the demand that the borough has, which is seasonal. But we see an opportunity here to start working towards these purchases to reduce costs in 14 and 15. And we hope that by considering that now in the current marketplace, that we could put some downward pressure on costs in 14 and 15 and avoid any adjustments to rates in those periods and prepare us for the 16 and 17 period when we think we have additional downside.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, we'll be buying based on the shape.
Correct.
So we won't be buying one stack per month. We'll be buying based on our historic need,
That's right.
which should make us a little bit more efficient. We won't have any excess.
Yeah, that's one of the critical things, and I think that leads nicely in another discussion here, but one of the critical components that we see is the importance of, if you're going to participate in block power purchases, that the shape is critical. You know, you have to consider not blocking in every single purchase, but really taking into account the shape of your load, because you don't want to deal with things like excess or deficiency a lot. You know, that puts you into a market position and you're having to manage that market exposure. So we're always going to deal with weather risk, and that's going to move load up and down. So you're always, if you're in a block strategy, you're going to have those changing components. That's part of what you have to be willing to live with if you're in this type of strategy. But it is important to shape these needs to meet your load requirements, and that's what we're talking about.
Aaron,
Yes, ma'am.
if the energy source builds into their cost a guarantee of return on overbuying, then the cost of the energy will go up comparably. Is that true?
I'm not sure I understand. Could you maybe repeat that?
If you buy an energy source that guarantees repurchasing back any overage,
Okay.
would the original cost then be comparably higher than if you don't have that guarantee built in?
Yes. What you're referring to is a contract often referred to as full requirements,
Right.
which means a supplier will give us whatever we need, not more than that, not less than that. But what they account for is that risk associated with changing volumes, not knowing how much you're going to necessarily need at any given point in time. So there is a premium associated with that. Now, that premium is balanced out with, well, you're getting price certainty, you know, for all of your requirements. So, you know, there's pros and cons associated with that type of structure. The borough moved from the contract with DTE historically that was fixed price full requirements, and it didn't have that volume risk on it. Now you do have that component, and so you're having to manage, well, if my load drops down to a certain level, I still have these block power purchases to deal with. Of course, the perfect storm of issues, if you're long with blocks and the market tanks, which is where we are today, you bought at a certain price and you're selling back at a lower price for any excess. The borough has done a really great job with AMP to mitigate that in some way. AMP has worked with us to sell some of that excess supply off at advantageous pricing to avoid the level of harm that we would otherwise see from excess supply. But you do have to deal with, in a block strategy, what are you going to do with that excess supply? And it does have the ability to impact your overall weighted cost. So that's something you balance when you're talking about these risks.
So it would be advisable then to purchase the remainder in a by the month, as opposed to getting any guarantees and having automatic cost.
Well, right now we're proposing, given that we're already down the road of this block power procurement strategy, that we would shape it a little more granularly, that we would try to make these purchases look like the months and their need in 14 and 15, so that we can limit the amount of risk that we would have on load changes.
Thank you.
We're trying to do more of that, and I have a slide here to that tune as well, so I'm glad you essentially.
Thank you.